You can learn a lot about a person by the machine they drive, Victoria Hayes said with a smirk. And that tractor tells me everything I need to know. The executives around her laughed politely. The contractors laughed a little louder. Even a few workers exchanged awkward smiles as the sound drifted across the open prairie beneath the bright Montana sun. What none of them knew was that the man sitting on that faded green tractor owned the one piece of land Victoria Hayes had spent 6 months trying to acquire. And before the harvest season was over, that truth would leave an entire room speechless. The wind rolled across thousands of acres of golden grass, bending the tall stalks like waves on an endless sea. Dust drifted lazily along the dirt road, separating Victoria's newly purchased development site from the neighboring ranch. Standing beside a brand-new luxury SUV worth more than some homes in the county, Victoria adjusted her sunglasses and surveyed the property she had just purchased. At 38, she was one of the youngest CEOs in agricultural technology. Investors admired her confidence. Competitors feared her ambition. Employees respected her results. Today was supposed to mark the beginning of her company's largest expansion project yet. Then her eyes landed on the tractor. The machine looked ancient. Its paint was chipped. Rust marked the edges of the metal frame. The exhaust pipe rattled slightly as it moved through the field. Behind the wheel sat a broad-shouldered man wearing a faded denim shirt and a weathered ranch hat. He looked completely ordinary. Victoria folded her arms. "That thing still runs?" she asked. One of the project managers chuckled. "Barely, I'd guess. Looks like it belongs in a museum," Victoria replied. More laughter followed. Across the fence line, Ethan Walker heard every word. He slowed the tractor and glanced toward the group. His blue eyes settled on Victoria for a brief moment. Then he simply nodded and continued driving. No anger, no argument, no attempt to defend himself, just quiet dignity. That response somehow annoyed Victoria more than if he had fired back. "Interesting guy," one contractor remarked. "That's Ethan Walker. Local farmer?" Victoria asked. "Something like that." Ethan guided the tractor toward the far side of the field where a small figure waited near a wooden fence. 11-year-old Lily Walker stood holding a sketchbook against her chest. Her blonde hair danced in the afternoon breeze. She smiled the moment she saw her father approaching. Ethan parked the tractor and climbed down. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded but hesitated. "Daddy, were those people laughing at you?" Ethan looked back toward the development site. The laughter had already faded into the wind. "Maybe." Lily lowered her eyes. "I don't like it when people do that." Ethan smiled gently and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes people only see what's right in front of them." Lily glanced at the old tractor. "And they think they know everything?" "Sometimes." He looked across the fence line toward Victoria Hayes. The CEO was already directing meetings, pointing at maps, and discussing plans for the future. But the truth has a way of showing up when the time is right. Lily followed his gaze. Neither of them knew that before long, the woman who laughed at the old tractor would discover exactly who Ethan Walker really was. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in clear blue skies and the scent of fresh-cut hay drifting across the valley. Victoria Hayes stepped out of her SUV and adjusted the sleeves of her tailored jacket as dozens of local families gathered for the county agricultural fair. Her company had sponsored the event, and banners displaying the corporate logo fluttered above rows of booths, food stands, and exhibition tents. Everywhere she looked, people smiled, shook hands, and talked about the future she promised to bring to the region. Victoria enjoyed moments like this. They reminded her how far she had come. Near the center of the fairgrounds, a children's art competition had drawn a crowd. Long folding tables displayed paintings, sketches, and handmade projects created by students from nearby schools. Victoria stopped when one particular drawing caught her eye. It showed rolling ranch land beneath a golden sunset. An old tractor sat in the middle of the field. Beside it stood a father and daughter holding hands. The details were surprisingly beautiful. "Who made this?" Victoria asked. A volunteer checked the registration card. "Lily Walker. She is one of our most talented young artists." Victoria glanced at the picture again. The tractor immediately reminded her of the machine she had laughed at days earlier. Before she could stop herself, She smiled and said, "Well, I suppose everyone paints what they know." At least she did not choose something more modern. A few people nearby chuckled politely. Victoria did not notice the silence that followed. She did not see the small figure standing only a few feet away. Lily had just returned from another booth carrying a lemonade. The smile on her face disappeared. The words landed harder than Victoria intended. Lily looked down at the drawing she had spent weeks creating. To her, it was not just a tractor. It was memories. Early mornings beside her father. Summer sunsets across the ranch. Lessons about honesty, patience, and hard work. The volunteer shifted uncomfortably. Actually, that piece is one of the favorites to win. Victoria nodded distractedly. I am sure it is charming. I just think children should dream bigger than old farm equipment. Lily quietly set down her lemonade and walked away before anyone noticed the tears forming in her eyes. Across the fairgrounds, Ethan was helping an elderly rancher repair a loose gate hinge near the livestock area when he spotted his daughter moving through the crowd. Something in her posture immediately caught his attention. Lily usually walked with energy. Today her shoulders seemed heavier. He excused himself and followed her toward a quiet row of cottonwood trees at the edge of the fairgrounds. When he found her sitting alone on a wooden bench, she was staring at the ground. "Hey, sweetheart," Ethan said gently. "What happened?" Lily hesitated. The breeze rustled through the leaves overhead. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the carnival rides in the distance. Finally, she looked up. "Do people ever think something is not valuable just because it is old?" Ethan sat beside her. He already suspected the answer. Mattered more than the question. In the distance, Victoria continued greeting investors and community leaders, completely unaware that a few careless words had just created a wound she would soon wish she could take back. For a long moment, Ethan simply sat beside his daughter beneath the shade of the cottonwood trees. He did not rush to answer. He never did. The late afternoon sun painted long golden shadows across the fairgrounds while distant music drifted through the warm Montana air. Nearby, children laughed near the carousel. Somewhere a country singer tested a microphone. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet for Lily, the world felt a little smaller than it had an hour ago. Ethan folded his weathered hands together and looked out across the valley. "Let me ask you something," he said quietly. Lily wiped her eyes. "Okay. Do you remember your grandmother's old pocket watch?" Lily nodded immediately. "The silver one. That is the one." Ethan smiled. "When I first found it in a box, it looked worn out. Scratched. Old. Not very impressive. But it was important." "Why?" Lily thought for a moment. "Because Grandpa carried it every day." Ethan nodded. "Exactly. Its value was never in how shiny it looked. Its value was in the story behind it." The breeze moved gently through the trees. Lily stared at the grass beneath her shoes. Ethan continued. "People often judge what they can see. A truck, a house, a tractor, a pair of boots. Sometimes they think those things tell the whole story. And they do not. Not even close." Lily finally looked up. Ethan's voice remained calm, steady, and certain. "The strongest people I have ever known rarely looked impressive at first glance. The kindest people, the smartest people, the people with the most character. They usually spent more time building their lives than showing them off." Lily was quiet. The words settled slowly into her heart. Across the fairgrounds, Victoria stood near a large presentation tent speaking with investors who had flown in from Denver and Seattle. She was confident, as always, discussing expansion plans, irrigation systems, and future revenue projections. Yet something kept pulling at the edge of her attention. Earlier, she had noticed the little girl walking away from the art display. The memory lingered longer than she expected. "Victoria," one investor asked, "did you hear me?" She blinked. "Sorry. Yes. Go ahead." The conversation resumed, but her focus never fully returned. Back beneath the cottonwoods, Lily took a deep breath. "Daddy." "Yes." "Does it ever bother you when people make assumptions?" Ethan laughed softly. Not a bitter laugh. A patient one. "It used to." "What changed?" He looked toward the horizon where the ranch stretched beyond rolling hills and grazing pastures. "I realized something important. If someone needs to know my story before they treat me with respect, then they are not really respecting me. They are respecting the story. Lily thought about that. So what should I do? Ethan smiled. Keep being yourself. Keep drawing. Keep learning. Keep being kind. Character takes years to build and only seconds to recognize. A comfortable silence followed. The sounds of the fair drifted through the trees again. Then Lily stood and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan hugged her back. Neither noticed Victoria standing several yards away near the walking path. She had not meant to stop. She had not meant to listen. Yet somehow she had heard enough. And for the first time since arriving in town, the confident CEO found herself wondering if she had completely misjudged the quiet rancher next door. 3 weeks passed, and the valley changed. The vibrant green fields that had welcomed Victoria Hayes on her arrival slowly faded beneath an unforgiving stretch of heat. Day after day, the Montana sun hung motionless above the plains. The creeks shrank. The soil hardened. Dust coated fence posts and settled over machinery like a thin blanket of ash-colored powder. What had begun as a promising season was becoming something far more serious. Victoria stood inside the main operations trailer of her development site, studying a wall of digital reports. "Tell me again," she said. The project engineer shifted uneasily. "The irrigation network is not distributing water evenly across the property. Why? We are still trying to determine that." Victoria folded her arms. "You have had 10 days. The engineer exchanged nervous glances with 2 specialists flown in from Denver. "The system should be working. Every component checks out individually. The pumps work. The sensors work. The control software responds correctly. But water pressure continues dropping across entire sections of the property." Silence settled over the trailer. Outside, expensive equipment sat idle beneath the afternoon sun. Every lost day meant lost revenue. Every delay threatened investor confidence. Victoria looked through the window toward the distant fields. Thousands of acres depended on this system. Millions of dollars depended on this system. "Fix it," she said quietly. "Whatever it takes." The following week brought no improvement. Additional consultants arrived. More reports were generated. More meetings filled the schedule. Yet the problem remained. Water entered the network. Somewhere along the way, efficiency disappeared. Meanwhile, life on Ethan Walker's ranch continued at its usual pace. Before sunrise each morning, he inspected fences, checked livestock, and reviewed water levels across his property. Years of ranching had taught him something technology often forgot. The land always told a story if someone took time to listen. One afternoon, Lily sat beside him on the porch while they watched clouds gathering on the distant horizon. "The people next door seem worried," she said. Ethan nodded. "They are. Do you think they will figure it out?" He took a sip of coffee. "Eventually." Lily tilted her head. "You already know what is wrong, do you not?" Ethan smiled faintly. His daughter knew him too well. "Maybe. Then why do not you tell them?" The question lingered in the warm evening air. Ethan looked toward the neighboring property where trucks moved back and forth like restless ants. Workers hurried between equipment stations. Frustration seemed to hang over the entire project. "Sometimes people have to ask before they are ready to hear an answer," he said. 2 days later, another emergency meeting was called. Victoria listened as experts reviewed yet another unsuccessful analysis. Her patience was disappearing. Her investors were demanding results. The pressure in the room felt heavier than the summer heat outside. Then one local contractor cleared his throat. "There might be someone else worth talking to." Victoria looked up. "Who?" The contractor hesitated. "The rancher next door." Several people laughed. Victoria almost joined them. Then she remembered a quiet voice beneath the cottonwood trees. She remembered a little girl holding a sketchbook. Most of all, she remembered the calm certainty in Ethan Walker's eyes. For the first time, she did not dismiss the suggestion. And somewhere deep inside, a small question began to grow. What if the man she thought she understood was someone entirely different from the person she imagined? The next morning began with a pale orange sunrise spreading across the valley like a slow-moving tide of light. Victoria stood alone inside the operations trailer long before her staff arrived. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside stacks of reports that all said the same thing. The irrigation failure continued. Crop projections were falling. Costs were rising. Time was running out. She stared through the window toward the neighboring ranch. In the distance, Ethan Walker's old tractor moved steadily across a field that looked far healthier than her own. The sight irritated her for reasons she could not fully explain. Finally, she picked up her keys. 20 minutes later, her SUV rolled slowly down the gravel road separating the two properties. Ethan was repairing a fence when he noticed the vehicle approaching. He set down his tools and waited. Victoria stepped out, clearly uncomfortable. Neither spoke for a moment. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and pine from the surrounding hills. "Mr. Walker," she said at last. Ethan nodded. "Victoria." She looked surprised he knew her first name. "I have a problem." A faint smile touched Ethan's face. "I figured." Victoria exhaled slowly. "My engineers cannot identify why the irrigation system keeps losing pressure." Ethan remained silent. "Someone suggested you might have an opinion." The words sounded difficult for her to say. Ethan glanced toward the distant development site. "And now you are asking?" "Yes." Another quiet pause followed. Victoria almost expected him to remind her of the tractor, the fair, the comments. Instead, he simply picked up his hat. "Show me." 40 minutes later, they stood beside a network of pumps, pipes, and monitoring equipment worth millions of dollars. Engineers surrounded them with folded arms and skeptical expressions. One consultant whispered something under his breath. Another checked his watch. Ethan ignored them all. He walked slowly along the main distribution line. He crouched beside several valves. He examined the soil. He studied the terrain. He asked only a handful of questions. "How long has this section been losing pressure?" 12 days. "When did the problem first appear?" "Right after the expansion line was activated." Ethan nodded. Then he continued walking. The others followed. Nearly an hour passed. The afternoon sun climbed higher. Finally, Ethan stopped near a barely noticeable rise in the ground several hundred yards from the main pumping station. He pointed toward a section of buried pipe. "There." One engineer frowned. "We checked that line." Ethan looked at him calmly. "You checked the pipe. You did not check the elevation change underneath it." Confused looks spread across several faces. Ethan knelt and brushed aside a layer of dry dirt. The new line was installed slightly above grade. It creates an air pocket every time pressure drops below a certain threshold. Silence. One engineer blinked. Another immediately opened a tablet and began reviewing installation maps. Minutes later, his eyes widened. "He is right." The words seemed to suck all the air from the group. Victoria stared at Ethan. "That is it." Ethan shrugged. "Looks that way." "You figured that out in an hour?" "The land usually tells you what is wrong if you pay attention." Nobody laughed this time. Nobody smirked. As workers hurried to verify the diagnosis, Victoria watched Ethan standing quietly beside the field. He asked for no credit. He demanded no apology. He simply prepared to leave. And for the first time, she found herself wondering how many other things she had completely failed to see. About the man next door. The repair worked. Within 48 hours, water flowed normally across the development site. Pressure levels stabilized. Crop forecasts recovered. Investors stopped calling with worried questions. For most people involved in the project, the crisis had ended. For Victoria Hayes, it had only begun. The answer she had spent weeks chasing had come from a man driving an old tractor and wearing dust-covered boots. The realization followed her everywhere. It lingered during meetings. It surfaced during conference calls. It sat quietly in the back of her mind whenever she looked out toward the neighboring ranch. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Victoria remained alone in her office reviewing property records connected to the region. The screen glowed softly against the darkened room. Outside, the last light of sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and amber. She was not looking for anything specific. At least that was what she told herself. Curiosity had simply become impossible to ignore. She typed Ethan Walker's name into the county database. A list of parcels appeared. Victoria frowned. Then she leaned closer. That cannot be right. She clicked the first record. Then another. Then another. The numbers continued growing. Hundreds of acres became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened valuation reports, tax records, historical ownership documents. The silence inside the office suddenly felt enormous. Ethan Walker did not own a small ranch. He owned one of the largest privately held ranch properties in the entire county. The combined valuation exceeded $120 million. Victoria stared at the screen. For several seconds, she forgot to breathe. Images flashed through her mind. The old tractor, the county fair, Lily's drawing, the comments she had made without thinking. Every assumption she had formed began collapsing one after another. Yet the number itself was not what unsettled her most. Wealth explained very little. Plenty of wealthy people spent their lives making sure everyone knew exactly how wealthy they were. Ethan had done the opposite. She continued reading. Then another discovery stopped her cold. A charitable foundation connected to local school programs listed an anonymous donor responsible for funding scholarships across 3 counties. The donor's legal representative traced back to Walker Ranch Holdings. Victoria opened another document. Then another. Hospital expansion donations. Agricultural education grants. Emergency drought relief funds from previous years. The same name appeared again and again, always hidden behind trusts, foundations, or private agreements. Nobody in town seemed to talk about it. Nobody appeared to know. Or perhaps they simply respected his privacy. Victoria slowly leaned back in her chair. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely humbled. She had measured a man using appearances and found herself completely wrong. Across the valley, Ethan sat on his porch beside Lily watching the first stars emerge above the Montana sky. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth after irrigation water had settled into the fields. "You look thoughtful," Lily said. Ethan smiled. "Do I? Something happened today." He chuckled softly. "You always notice." Lily grinned. "I learned from the best." Ethan looked across the darkness toward the neighboring property where a single office light still burned. Neither of them knew that at that exact moment, Victoria Hayes was staring at a screen filled with truths she never expected to find. And for the first time since arriving in the valley, she no longer saw Ethan Walker as the quiet rancher next door. She saw him as a mystery she had completely failed to understand. The days that followed felt different. Not because anything around the valley had changed, but because Victoria Hayes could no longer see it through the same eyes. Every road she traveled seemed to lead past another reminder of Ethan Walker. A scholarship plaque inside the high school gymnasium. A children's reading program at the local library. A renovated wing at the county hospital. Names were rarely attached, but once she knew where to look, the pattern became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Victoria drove into town for a meeting with community leaders. The gathering took place inside a modest brick building that served as both a town hall and event center. As she entered, conversations paused. Smiles appeared. Handshakes followed. The reception was warm, yet something unexpected caught her attention. Framed photographs lined the walls. Pictures from county fairs, harvest festivals, scholarship ceremonies, and charity fundraisers stretched back nearly 20 years. In photo after photo, Ethan appeared somewhere in the background, never at the center, never standing in front. Sometimes he was setting up chairs, sometimes carrying supplies, sometimes helping elderly residents navigate crowded events. Always present, never seeking attention. Victoria stopped in front of one particular photograph. A severe drought from nearly a decade earlier had threatened ranches across the region. The image showed volunteers distributing water and feed supplies. There, standing off to one side, was Ethan. That was a difficult year, an older council member said as he approached. Victoria glanced toward him. He helped organize it? The man smiled. Organize it? Without him, half the ranchers in this county would have lost everything. Victoria looked back at the photograph. Nobody ever talks about it. That is because he never does. The council member chuckled softly. That man has spent years helping people while pretending he is doing nothing special. Another leader joined them. You should have seen him after the school roof collapsed during a storm years ago. He had crews and equipment there before the insurance company even returned our phone calls. And he paid for half the repairs, someone added from across the room. Victoria listened quietly. Story after story followed. None of them sounded exaggerated. None of them sounded rehearsed. They were simply memories people carried because they mattered. Driving home later that evening, Victoria felt a growing weight in her chest. Not guilt alone. Respect. The kind earned slowly over decades. The kind money could not purchase. As sunset painted the sky with streaks of orange and gold, she passed the edge of Walker Ranch. Ethan was repairing a gate while Lily sat nearby, sketching in her notebook. The scene looked simple, ordinary, peaceful. Yet now Victoria understood that appearances had fooled her from the beginning. She pulled her vehicle to the shoulder and watched from a distance. Lily laughed at something her father said. Ethan smiled and returned to his work. There was no audience, no recognition, no cameras, just a father and daughter sharing the final light of day. Victoria remembered every careless assumption she had made, every judgment, every moment she had mistaken humility for limitation. And standing there beside the road, she realized something that unsettled her more than any financial report ever could. The richest thing about Ethan Walker had never been his land, his assets, or his success. It was his character. And for the first time since arriving in the valley, Victoria found herself hoping she might still have a chance to earn his respect. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and golden fields stretching across the valley like a patchwork quilt beneath endless Montana skies. The development project had recovered completely, and investors from across the country were preparing to visit for the annual Agricultural Innovation Gala. It was the most important event of the year for Victoria Hayes and her company. Reporters would attend. Industry leaders would attend. Major partners would attend. Success would be measured by impressions, presentations, and influence. Yet despite weeks of preparation, Victoria found herself thinking less about the event and more about a man who would never care about any of those things. The evening of the gala arrived cool and clear. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the grand ballroom of the County Convention Center. Waiters moved quietly between tables. Conversations blended into a soft hum of business, ambition, and opportunity. Victoria stood near the stage greeting guests as they entered. One by one, executives arrived. Investors arrived. Politicians arrived. Cameras flashed. Smiles appeared. Everything seemed exactly as expected. Then the front doors opened again. Ethan Walker stepped inside wearing a simple dark suit. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Beside him walked Lily, wearing a light blue dress and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Several people noticed them immediately. Victoria watched from across the room. Something unusual happened next. A prominent investor from Chicago spotted Ethan first. The man stopped mid-conversation. Then he smiled and walked directly toward him. Ethan. More guests turned. Another investor followed. Then another. Within moments, a growing circle formed around the rancher. Victoria stared in disbelief. She recognized many of the faces approaching him. Some managed billion-dollar portfolios. Others owned major agricultural companies. Several had been scheduled to meet with her personally later that evening. Yet now they stood greeting Ethan with genuine warmth and respect. Good to see you again. How is the family? Still supporting those scholarship programs? We never properly thanked you for that project last year. The conversations overlapped naturally. Nobody seemed interested in status. Nobody seemed interested in appearances. They simply respected him. Across the ballroom, the energy shifted. Guests who had barely noticed Ethan before suddenly began looking at him differently. Curious whispers spread from table to table. Victoria remained frozen. Every assumption she had once carried seemed impossibly distant now. Then something even more unexpected happened. The chairman of one of the largest agricultural investment groups in America stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone lightly. The room quieted. Before we begin tonight's presentation, he said, there is someone here whose contributions to rural communities deserve recognition. His gaze moved toward Ethan. A hush settled over the ballroom. Many people know him as a rancher. Some know him as a businessman. But countless families know him as the reason their schools stayed open, their hospitals expanded, and their communities survived difficult years. Silence followed. Deep, complete, respectful. The kind of silence money could never buy. Hundreds of people turned toward Ethan Walker. He looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. Lily smiled proudly beside him. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Months earlier she had laughed at what she thought she understood. Tonight she stood in a room filled with people who understood far more than she ever had. And as the applause slowly began rising around her, Victoria realized the most powerful person in the ballroom was not standing on the stage at all. The applause continued long after the chairman stepped away from the microphone. Ethan acknowledged the room with a small nod, then gently redirected attention toward the evening's purpose. It was a simple gesture, but it revealed something Victoria had come to understand. He never chased recognition. He simply carried responsibility with quiet grace. As the gala progressed, conversations filled the ballroom once again. Yet the atmosphere felt different. Warmer. More genuine. Victoria spent the next hour moving through introductions and presentations, but her mind remained elsewhere. Finally, she made a decision. Near the end of the evening, she crossed the ballroom and approached Ethan and Lily. Several guests noticed. A few conversations softened into silence. Ethan looked up as she arrived. Lily stood beside him holding a small dessert plate. For a brief moment, Victoria found herself unusually nervous. Not because of business, not because of investors, because she wanted to say something honest. "Lily," she said softly. The young girl looked up. "Yes." Victoria smiled gently. "Your drawing at the fair was beautiful." Lily blinked in surprise. "Thank you." Victoria took a breath. "I should have told you that the first time I saw it." The ballroom seemed to fade into the background. "I said things that were unfair. About your artwork. About things that mattered to you." Lily glanced at Ethan before looking back at Victoria. "You did not like the tractor." A faint laugh escaped Victoria. "No. The truth is, I did not understand what it meant." Lily studied her for a second, then smiled. "Most people do not." Ethan remained quiet. Victoria turned toward him. "This part felt harder. I owe you an apology too." Ethan listened without interrupting. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I thought I understood who you were. I was wrong." The honesty surprised even her. Not because of the ranch. Not because of the money. I was wrong because I looked at appearances instead of character. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a smug one. Just kindness. "We all do that sometimes." Victoria shook her head slightly. "You should be angrier than that." Ethan chuckled. "Life is too short for that." The answer somehow made her eyes sting. Around them, music drifted softly through the ballroom. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Outside, beyond the tall windows, stars filled the Montana sky. Lily looked between them. "So everybody is friends now." Ethan laughed. Victoria laughed too. "I hope so." Months later, spring returned to the valley. Green fields replaced winter brown. New calves wandered open pastures. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides. The development project flourished, but something else had grown alongside it. Respect. Friendship. Trust. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Victoria parked beside the ranch and walked toward the porch carrying a basket of homemade pie she had spent far too many hours learning to bake. Lily spotted her first and waved enthusiastically. Ethan stepped outside and smiled. The old tractor still sat near the barn. Its paint remained faded. Its metal still carried years of honest wear. Yet now, whenever Victoria saw it, she thought of something entirely different. Not machinery, not wealth, not status. She thought of dignity, of second chances, of a father who taught his daughter that character matters more than appearances. And as laughter drifted across the ranch beneath the golden light of another Montana sunset, Victoria realized the most valuable thing she had found in the valley was never listed on a balance sheet. It was the quiet reminder that the worth of a person can never be measured by what stands in their driveway, but by what lives in their heart.